They laughed at it. German pilots in 1943 looked up and saw a beast that seemed too heavy, too slow, too clumsy to ever threaten the skies. They mocked it as a 7-ton milk bottle, certain their Messerschmitts and Focke Wulfs would swat it from the heavens with ease. But behind the bulky frame of this strange American machine hid a storm of steel. 8 Browning .50 caliber guns, brutal diving speed, and armor that could shrug off cannon fire. The laughter would not last long. For when the Jug arrived, the skies of Europe would never be the same. Stay with us, because this is not just another story. This is the story of the Thunderbolt, the plane that turned mockery into fear and fear into respect. The journey begins in the tense days of 1940, before America had even entered the war. At Republic Aviation, engineer Alexander Kartveli faced a challenge unlike any other. Build a fighter that could protect bombers deep inside enemy territory and survive the fiercest battles against the Luftwaffe. The answer he created was not graceful, but it was unstoppable. With a 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney engine at its heart and a frame built like a tank, the P-47 was born not to dance, but to endure, not to dazzle, but to dominate. The year was 1940. Europe was already burning. Germany had overrun Poland, stormed across France, and now stood poised to challenge Britain in the skies. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched with unease. Officially, America was still at peace, but the storm of war was coming, and those who planned ahead knew that if the nation entered the conflict, its airmen would need something extraordinary. At Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York, engineer Alexander Kartveli faced a daunting task. Born in Georgia, a man who had fled wars before, Kartveli understood the cost of weakness. Now, he was asked to design a fighter that could do what no American plane had yet achieved: fly high, fly far, and fight toe-to-toe with the best of the Luftwaffe. The commanders wanted a guardian for their bombers, an aircraft powerful enough to escort them into the heart of Europe, yet strong enough to withstand enemy fire. Kartveli's answer was radical. Instead of starting with a sleek, lightweight frame, he began with the engine, the massive Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp. With 2,000 horsepower, it was one of the largest radial engines ever fitted to a single-seat aircraft. Everything else was built around this beating heart of steel. The result was a machine unlike any fighter before it, enormous, wide-bodied, and astonishingly heavy. When the prototype first rolled out in 1941, pilots were stunned. Fully loaded, it weighed nearly 17,000 pounds, dwarfing the British Spitfire and the German Messerschmitt Bf-109. Its fuselage bulged with curves that earned it an unflattering nickname: the Jug. Many, it looked less like a fighter and more like a flying milk bottle. The laughter came quickly. Test pilots grumbled about its sluggish climb and ponderous handling. Compared to the nimble aircraft of the day, the P-47 seemed clumsy, even absurd. Luftwaffe intelligence, catching wind of the new American design, mocked it as a symbol of excess, too big, too heavy, too slow to ever be effective. And yet, hidden within its bulk, were qualities no one could ignore. Kartveli had not designed a duelist. He had created a brawler. The Jug carried 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each weapon spat 13 rounds per second. Together, they could unleash over 100 bullets every heartbeat, more than 13 pounds of lead in the air. Against German fighters armed with just 2 cannons and a pair of rifle-caliber guns, this was overwhelming firepower. But power alone was not enough. The P-47 was built to take punishment. Its air-cooled radial engine could survive damage that would send a liquid-cooled Merlin or Daimler-Benz into flames. Its frame was reinforced like a tank. Armor plating wrapped around the cockpit, giving pilots a fighting chance against cannon shells and anti-aircraft fire. Pilots would later swear that the Jug could return home with holes ripped through its wings, fuselage shredded, even parts of the tail missing, and still bring its flyer back alive. Still, in those early days, doubts lingered. The Jug's fuel consumption was immense. Without drop tanks, it could barely reach beyond the French coast, making it useless for deep escort missions. Its bulk made climbing slow and energy-hungry, frustrating for pilots who expected agility. Many wondered if the design was a mistake, a dead end. Yet beneath those complaints lay the truth. The P-47 was not meant to twist and turn like a Spitfire. It was meant to dive. Its weight, so often mocked, gave it terrifying speed when pointed downward. In those dives, the Jug revealed its true nature, a hammer descending from the heavens, built not for elegance, but for destruction. This was the beginning of a story that would change the skies, for while German pilots laughed and American flyers doubted, the Jug waited for its chance. The moment would come in 1943 when its massive shadow fell over Europe and laughter turned into fear. When the P-47 finally arrived in Europe in the spring of 1943, German pilots could hardly contain their laughter. Against the slim, deadly lines of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke Wulf 190, the Jug looked like a bloated mistake. Luftwaffe briefings mocked it as the 7-ton milk bottle. To aces like Adolf Galland, who prided themselves on the precision and elegance of German design, the American fighter seemed like an overweight brute with no chance of survival. But arrogance is a dangerous shield. The Luftwaffe had spent years perfecting dogfighting tactics, tight turns, rapid climbs, swift attacks. Against that pedigree, the Jug appeared hopeless. Yet beneath the heavy skin of steel lay something the Germans had not expected. The first encounters told a different story. American pilots quickly learned that trying to outturn a German fighter was suicide. But the Jug did not need to outturn anyone. What it could do was dive. Once the pilot pushed the nose down, the weight of the aircraft transformed into unstoppable speed. German pilots who tried to follow often found their controls locking, their wings shuddering on the edge of collapse. The Jug simply kept going, hurtling past 500 miles per hour before leveling out in safety. Those who survived described it with awe. One Luftwaffe ace admitted, "You could not follow a Jug in a dive. It would take you to your death." Even more shocking was its resilience. Time and again, German gunners poured cannon shells into the P-47 only to see it stagger, smoke, and somehow keep flying. Pilots compared it to a flying fortress in miniature. For men who had once considered the Jug a slow-moving target, the sight was unnerving. They discovered that killing a Thunderbolt was far harder than killing a Spitfire or a Mustang. And then came the roar of its guns. When those 8 Brownings opened fire, the sky itself seemed to tear. Each wing carried 4 weapons, each capable of spitting 13 rounds per second. Together, they unleashed over 100 bullets every heartbeat. A Messerschmitt caught in that torrent was shredded in moments. A Focke Wulf sliced apart before its pilot could even react. Survivors spoke of watching comrades vanish in midair, torn apart by the sheer volume of fire. One Luftwaffe veteran grimly confessed, "It was like being hit by a flying wall of lead." For the Americans, this was the revelation. At first, they had doubted the Jug. They had complained about its size, its thirst for fuel, its lack of elegance. But in combat, its true nature revealed itself. It was not a duelist. It was a hammer. The Jug dove from the heavens, struck with overwhelming force, and shrugged off damage that would have destroyed other planes. Slowly, pilots began to trust it, even love it. Stories spread of Thunderbolts limping home with wings shredded, engines sputtering, even tails nearly torn away, and yet still bringing their pilots back alive. The laughter in German briefings began to fade. Reports came in of American fighters that refused to die, of bombers escorted deeper into Europe than before, of convoys strafed to ruin by low-flying Jugs. The milk bottle was proving itself to be a monster. And for the first time, Luftwaffe aces realized that their arrogance had blinded them. They were not facing a mistake. They were facing a weapon designed for a new kind of war. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest invasion in human history had begun. As Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, thousands of aircraft roared overhead. Among them, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the flying tank that German soldiers had once dismissed as clumsy, now descended with terrifying purpose. Before dawn, Thunderbolts swept across northern France, shredding rail lines, cutting communications, and hammering convoys rushing reinforcements to the coast. By daylight, they circled above the beaches, ready to pounce on anything that moved. For German troops, it was a nightmare. Survivors described crouching in hedgerows, hearing the growl of engines, and then seeing the massive frame of a jug diving straight at them. Within seconds, 850 caliber guns unleashed fire that ripped apart trucks, artillery, and men alike. For the Luftwaffe, Normandy was a disaster. Their numbers had already been thinned by years of attrition. When they rose to challenge the invasion, they found themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and overpowered. Even elite pilots admitted the truth. Against swarms of Thunderbolts, their Messerschmitts and Focke Wulfs had little chance. What had once been dismissed as a flying milk bottle had become a weapon of paralysis, freezing German forces in place while the Allies surged forward. 6 months later came Hitler's last gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, under the cover of snow and fog, German tanks and infantry surged through the Ardennes. For a week, bad weather kept Allied aircraft grounded, and German troops moved with boldness. But on December 23rd, the skies cleared, and the nightmare returned. Thunderbolts swarmed over the snowy forests. Pilots called it turkey shoot weather. German survivors called it hell. Columns of panzers and trucks that had advanced confidently days before were now trapped on icy roads, their wrecks burning in the snow. Rockets from the jug split open heavy Tiger tanks. 50 caliber guns stitched convoys with fire, turning soldiers into shadows on the ground. Pilots recalled strafing until the roads looked like graveyards of steel. The psychological effect was crushing. German reports admitted entire units refused to move by day, convinced that the sky itself was cursed. By January 1945, the Bulge had collapsed. The last hope of splitting the Allies had been buried under burned-out tanks and shattered convoys, and hovering over it all was the jug. But the Thunderbolt's legacy was not only in great battles. Day after day, it became a terror of the roads and railways. Armed with bombs, rockets, and its 8 relentless Brownings, it scoured Europe like a predator. Every convoy was a target, every train a death sentence. Survivors recalled that daytime movement was suicide. The moment a column of panzers or trucks was spotted, the jug swooped down in waves, leaving black smoke and burning steel behind. German soldiers gave it a name. Jabo, short for Jagdbomber, the fighter bomber. They feared it. More than artillery, for artillery could be avoided. The jug was everywhere, a shadow in the sky that struck without warning. One officer confessed, "We feared the Jabos more than anything else. You could not escape them. They were everywhere." For American pilots, the jug became more than a weapon. It became a guardian. Stories spread of planes limping home with wings shredded, engines coughing smoke, tails half destroyed, and yet still flying. Its toughness gave pilots courage. They dove harder, stayed longer, and pressed attacks that might have been suicide in any other aircraft. In return, the Thunderbolt won their devotion. They called it a fortress with wings, a beast that refused to die. By 1945, the Luftwaffe was collapsing, its pilots broken in spirit as much as in numbers. They had mocked the jug as clumsy. Now they whispered of it as a nightmare. For ground troops, it meant sudden death from above. For the skies of Europe, it meant Allied dominance. And for the outcome of WW2, it meant one thing. The balance had tipped, and it would never tilt back. The story of the Thunderbolt is the story of transformation. What began as a clumsy giant, mocked as a 7-ton milk bottle, ended as one of the most feared weapons of the entire war. It was not sleek, it was not elegant, but it was unstoppable. In its frame of steel and its 8 roaring guns lay a truth. Survival, firepower, and resilience can matter more than beauty or grace. For the men who flew it, the jug was more than a machine. It was protection, a promise that no matter how brutal the battle, there was a chance to come home. For the soldiers on the ground who feared its shadow, it was a reminder that the tide had turned. And for the world, it became a symbol of industrial might, determination, and the will to endure. When historians look back at W2, they see many icons: the Spitfire, the Mustang, the Flying Fortress. Yet the Thunderbolt holds its own place among them, not as the prettiest, but as the most unyielding. It was the hammer of the skies, the terror of the roads, the storm that broke the backbone of the Luftwaffe and the Wehrmacht alike. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt was not just an aircraft. It was a declaration that strength lies not in appearances but in what endures, that freedom is worth fighting for, and that arrogance is no shield against resilience. As we reflect today, let us remember, the Jug was forged in the fires of World War II. Its power reshaped the skies of World War II, and its legacy remains one of the unforgettable stories of World War II. If this story stirred something within you, do not let it fade. Share it. Speak it. Remember it. Because history is not just about the past, it is about the lessons we carry forward, the fight for justice, the struggle for freedom, and the hope for peace. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more than a machine of war. It was a reminder of what determination, sacrifice, and unity could achieve. Built in the factories of America by the hands of men and women who worked endless shifts, it was a symbol of an entire nation rising to meet the gravest challenge in its history. Every rivet driven into its steel skin, every engine mounted onto its frame, carried not just technical skill, but also the hope of a world yearning for freedom. Imagine the contrast. On one side of the ocean, German pilots sat in their cockpits, laughing at reports of the overweight American fighter. On the other side, workers in Detroit, in New York, in countless small towns, labored day and night, pouring sweat and dreams into a machine that would soon sweep the laughter away. The battlefield was not only in the skies over Europe, but also on the assembly lines at home. Without those unseen heroes, there would have been no Jug, no hammer of steel to crush tyranny. For the pilots who flew it, the Jug carried stories that defy belief. Tales of aircraft returning with engines shot through, wings full of holes, tails barely attached, yet still flying. Tales of squadrons diving through flak storms, watching comrades fall, but pressing on because the mission demanded it. To them, the Thunderbolt was more than an airplane. It was a brother in arms. It was a promise of survival in a world that offered no guarantees. For German soldiers on the ground, the Jug meant something else entirely. It was dread. It was the low growl that froze their blood, the sudden shadow that sent entire columns scattering. Survivors of Normandy, of the Ardennes, of the long retreat into Germany, remembered it not as a plane, but as a predator that hunted without mercy. They gave it a name, Jabo, and spoke it with fear. Few things in war inspire such universal recognition. When both friend and foe understand its presence, means destiny is shifting. And for us today, what does the Thunderbolt mean? It is easy to see it as just another artifact of WW2, another machine among thousands, but to do so would miss its deeper truth. The Jug is proof that resilience, even when doubted or ridiculed, can reshape history. It reminds us that freedom is not born of elegance, but of endurance, that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the victory of those who refuse to give in. World War II ended decades ago, but the lessons of the Jug remain alive. They whisper that arrogance blinds the powerful, that unity can lift the humble, and that strength comes not from appearances, but from will. As long as we remember the roar of the Thunderbolt, we remember that the fight for justice, independence, and peace is never in vain.